Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. U.S. immigration agents shoot and kill a U.S. citizen in Minneapolis, sparking protests and condemnation from local leaders. The Department of Homeland Security says an agent fires in self-defense after the man approaches with a handgun and resists disarmament. Minnesota state investigators say federal agents refused to let them enter the Minneapolis shooting site despite a judge-signed warrant, deepening tensions over immigration officers' action. The refusal comes as local leaders push for independent review of federal actions after multiple fatal shootings in the city this month. Today, Finland's Prime Minister Petteri Orpo begins a 4-day visit to China with a large business delegation. Orpo is the second EU leader to visit China in just 3 weeks and the first Finnish Prime Minister to do so since 2017 amid geopolitical constraints. Myanmar's military chief defends the election as final voting takes place, with the military-backed party already holding large parliamentary majorities. Major opposition groups boycott the polls, while the UN and rights groups denounce the vote as a sham to entrench military rule. US, Russian and Ukrainian officials hold constructive talks in the UAE on possible parameters to end the war. Negotiators agreed to report back to their capitals and return for another round on February 1st. Donald Trump threatens a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods if Ottawa strikes a trade deal with China. The warning comes as US-Canada's ties strain after Canada announces a strategic partnership with Beijing. After Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni's disputed 7-term election, according to statements by opposition leader's wife Barbara Itungo Kyagulanyi, says she was strangled, held at gunpoint and assaulted during a raid on their Kampala home as security forces searched for the opposition leader Bobi Wine, who is currently under hiding. A major U.S. winter storm leaves more than 230,000 without power and triggers thousands of flight cancellations. Federal emergencies are declared in multiple states as forecasters warn of dangerous cold and heavy snow. Now for this hour, we start with U.S. Alex Pretti, a 37-year-old nurse who was shot and killed by federal immigration agents on Saturday, January 24, 2026 in Minneapolis. Multiple law enforcement agencies, including federal, state, and local officials, were present in the area. A video circulated online showed Pretti being wrestled to the ground by several officers before being shot several times. A second, more comprehensive video, Pretti is seen coming to the defense of an observer who was pushed to the ground by a federal agent. In response, the agent sprayed Pretti with a chemical agent and tackled him to the ground. At least 5 agents surrounded him then, and one appears to have taken a gun away from Pretti just before an agent fired and shot at close range, followed by a series of additional shots. The number of deaths in ICE custody has reached record levels since the beginning of 2025, coinciding with the significant increase in detention populations and federal enforcement operations. As of late January 2026, at least 38 deaths have been reported. In 2025, there were 32 deaths, making it the deadliest year for ICE detainees in over 2 decades, matching the previous record set in 2004. So far in 2026, 6 deaths have occurred in just the first 3 weeks of January alone. Alex Pretti, a 37-year-old nurse who was shot and killed by a federal immigration agent on Saturday in Minneapolis, Multiple law enforcement agencies, including federal, state, and local officials, were present in the area. A video circulated online showed Pretti being wrestled to the ground by several officers before being shot several times. A second, more comprehensive video, Pretti is seen coming to the defense of an observer who was pushed to the ground by a federal agent. In response, the agent sprayed Pretti with chemical agent and tackled him to the ground. At least 5 agents surrounded him, and one appears to have taken something away from Pretti just before an agent fired a shot at close range, followed by a series of additional shots. The number of deaths in ICE custody has reached record levels since the beginning of 2025, coinciding with the significant increase in detention population and federal enforcement operations. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Keith Vaz. He's a former British Minister, joins us live from London. Not Prime Minister, sorry about that. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for joining.
I'll take the job if it's available, Asma.
It's not
I'm
on
very
me.
happy to.
It's not on me, unfortunately. But yes, thank you very much for joining us again. Now, what's going on in U.S. as we see Minneapolis? It had 2 shootings only within this month, and now we know that it's record high, the detention, the number of deaths in ICE custody, and also people being held in detention.
Well, it's obviously a matter of great concern. Obviously, governments need to initiate immigration officers in order to obey the law for those who are living illegally. But this goes way beyond anything that any decent and civilized society would do. And I'm not surprised that there is a great deal of concern in the United States about this. I recently looked at a speech by the mayor of Minneapolis, and he seemed to be genuinely disgusted and ashamed of what was happening in America at this moment. So while not rushing to judgment, one does have to ensure that officers are able to do their job properly and lawfully without actually causing even more damage to the fabric of the society which Americans are living in at the moment.
So how do you think this is, changing the image of U.S. right now?
I think it is changing the image. You're quite right, Asma. I think there are 2 issues that are causing a lot of concern. First of all, for overseas students who are seeking to study in America, there has already been a decline in the numbers seeking to do so. Secondly, general visitors to the US who are worried about going there and maybe being caught up in this whole melee of activity that's going on. And thirdly, and most importantly for the Americans, is the forthcoming World Cup, because a lot of people are saying they're not going to go to America if they risk the possibility of they being arrested. So you have to be very careful in the way in which you look at this whole enforcement area, and you have to be much more respectful of the rights of individuals.
And what role should local and state officials play now that ICE agents rank up their force towards many people, especially minorities in states?
Well, there is, of course, an acceptance by the states that there should be an overall enforcement agency called ICE. But in our country, in the United Kingdom, there is only policing by consent. In other words, you work with the people who you are policing, and you do so with very much a light touch. Obviously, you go after the criminals. Nobody wants you to be having a light touch with those people who are committing crimes. But generally speaking, with the rest of the public, you have to be very careful. And the risk for them is that they will make a mistake, as a result of which innocent people, unconnected with what is going on, will be affected.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for sharing that insight. Now, moving on, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for more air defense support as Russian strikes level parts of Kyiv without heat in freezing conditions. Hundreds of residential buildings remain without heating for a second straight day after heavy Russian attacks on energy infrastructure. Zelensky says this winter has been the toughest yet, with Russia launching a massive wave of drones, guided bombs and missiles in just a week. He has said that Ukraine urgently needs more air defense missiles and is pressing the US and European allies to strengthen protection of Ukrainian skies. Kyiv's mayor says more than 1,600 apartment buildings are currently without heating, and around 500,000 people have been forced to evacuate. Zelensky was speaking in Vilnius, where he has attended a ceremony marking a historic uprising against Tsarist Russia. Meanwhile, US-brokered peace talks have ended without a breakthrough, though both sides have agreed to meet again next week. Now, we welcome back Mr. Vaz from London. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz. What more can you tell us about this?
Well, I'm still puzzled as to why there are talks going on in Abu Dhabi and negotiations between the three parties,
Yes.
America, the funder and supporter of Ukraine and Russia, who is a country regarded as the perpetrator. So these two protagonists are joined by the United States for these discussions. Yet at the same time, the violence continues. Obviously, we're hearing about what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians. I'm not sure what the Ukrainians are doing to the Russians. But this is a war, and the best way to ensure that there is some kind of legitimate action is peace action, is to stop, to have a ceasefire. And I cannot understand why people are not pressing for that, while Donald Trump, as the lead player in these negotiations, is not actually saying to Vladimir Putin, who we know gets on very well with, that we do need to have some kind of peace. And this is not happening at the moment, and it really does need to be resolved.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Vaz for joining us today and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. France has taken an Indian captain of an oil tanker in custody, which was suspected of belonging to Russia's sanctions-busting shadow fleet for the vessel failing to fly a flag. The 58-year-old captain was in charge of the tanker, the Grinch, which was intercepted and seized by the French Navy was intercepted in international waters between Spain and North Africa on 22nd of this month. According to a statement by the regional maritime prefecture, the French Navy escorted it to the Gulf of Fos in southern France. The vessel will be kept at the disposal of the Marseille public prosecutor as part of a preliminary investigation for failure to fly a flag. Now for this discussion, we welcome retired Major General Gigi Dwivedi. He's joining us as defense analyst. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you, Suma. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, what are we to make of this situation, and also why an Indian captain over here?
Well, Suma, firstly, we need to understand
Yes.
that all over the globe, there are about 1,400 tankers which are operating as part of the shadow fleet and transporting oil so that they can escape the sanction regime or the sanction stipulation. Now, as far as Russia is concerned, there are about 598 tankers of Russia which are under sanction by the European Union. And so this is one of the tankers which is on the list of the sanctioned tankers. And this tanker was carrying oil from Russia and from the Arctic region. And it was sailing, as you rightly said, around Spain and between Morocco, and which have been now, taken into, intercepted by the French Navy, and it is being brought to the Marseille, port. Now, point is that this is part of the sanction procedure or the sanction protocol, which is being implemented by the European countries of any oil tanker which doesn't fly the legitimate flag and which belongs to the Russian, fleet. So therefore, this action has been taken. Ironically, the captain of this tanker happens to be an Indian who has been taken into custody, and also the tanker per se has been intercepted under the guard of the French Navy, and the situation as it stands that because this tanker apparently are violating the sanction protocols or the sanctions which have been levied, so therefore it have been taken into custody and it will be dealt according to the procedure which has been evolved by the European countries against the sanctioned tankers. Asuma.
And Major General, do you think that this, the fact that the captain is Indian, although we don't know so much more about this and how it came to be, do you think that U.S. or Trump might pick on this?
Well, the point is that, the sanction as a procedure or sanction has been imposed by the European countries, this will apply across the board to all the tankers. I don't know whether they'll make any exception in this case just because he is an Indian. But the point is that I think it will be taken in the same measures or the same, possibly the protocol, the procedure will be applied to this tanker per se. Um, but at the same time, there are always diplomatic space and diplomatic understanding between the countries, and I'm sure the Indian side or the Indian embassy in France would be taking it up with the French government, and also keeping in view that India, he is Indian and Indians have obligation to their own citizens. To that extent, I am sure that diplomatic effort will be made. But how far they fructify, that is an open question which cannot be visualized or which cannot be actually at this juncture. You can't make a even wild guess. But the point is, you're right, that there will be certain diplomatic measures or certain diplomatic steps will be taken to ensure that the security of this Indian captain is actually taken up by the embassy or by the on the diplomatic channels. Asuma.
And Major General, you earlier, if I recall correctly, if you earlier mentioned that there can be maybe thousands of shadow fleets. We don't know exactly, but so what is Indian government or government's role to discourage their citizens to work on such fleets, as it's very dangerous and also it can affect international relations with many countries?
That's true, but then point is that these merchant navy personnel, they work with the various companies. Now it is very difficult to keep a track as to those companies, are they indulging in these spurious type of activities, or are they also having such like tankers as part of their companies, because this is a big racket, and lot of the tankers are carrying oil which is under sanction also from the Iran also, or Venezuela now again on the Venezuela coast. The Americans have actually laid some kind of blockade there so that the oil doesn't flow out from Venezuela. But the point is that it's very difficult for the government to keep a track as to which person is operating with which company, and is that company actually indulging in the shadow fleet activities. Well, that would be very difficult, but at the same time, certain caution can be, I would say, excised, and these personnel, the merchant navy who are, operating at the global companies can be sensitized on this issue, because after all, they've once some action is being taken or has been taken, well, it impacts the image of the country, and also it brings certain amount of concern for on the diplomatic channels. Asuma.
So lastly, Major General, is there any international law that discourages us, many world citizens to be involved in such?
Well, the point is that these sanctions have been imposed by certain countries, like America has imposed sanctions on the Russian oil, but these are country specific. As such, from the global bodies, there is no such law or the order which have been instituted. So these are the actions which have been taken by certain organization or certain country, like Europe has taken, because they feel that all these oil that is being carried by the shadow fleet, ultimately it fuels the war, because Russia gets the money and the funding to fight the war. So that is the basic rationale behind these sanctions, so that the Russians are not able to sell oil in the shadow markets, and also underprice the oil to get the funds, because Russian oil is under sanction by the Europe and by the Americans, and also because anyone who buys Russian oil also comes under the tariff sanctions. India is a case in point. So the point is that these sanctions are being instituted by specific countries or by the specific organization, but they don't have any globalized legality. But that's why, therefore, it is very difficult to say as to whether violating these is a violation of law and order or protocol, because these are being instituted by specific countries and by the specific organization, but globally they don't have a sanctity as far as the global bodies are concerned. So, Asuma.
Thank you very much, Major General, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to Middle East, U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reopen the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt. This comes after Gaza's new administrator has announced that it will be operational next week. Witkoff has pushed for its reopening before the remains of the last Israeli hostage, still believed to be in Gaza, that is to be returned. Also, he brought up the possibility of Turkey playing a role in Gaza's future, which was met with resistance from Israel. The Rafah crossing is crucial for humanitarian aid and a symbol for hope for many Palestinians. Witkoff has described the talks with Netanyahu as constructive and positive. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back retired Major General J.J. Dwivedi. He's a retired war veteran, currently Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for staying with us.
Thank you.
Now, looking at this, how do you analyze this current alignment between U.S. and Israel? Do you think they agree on everything, or do you think we are seeing some disagreements?
Oh, no, there are disagreements between US and Israel, and between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, no doubt about it, because there are certain contentious areas where they are not on the same page. But the point is that this 20-point peace agreement, which was enunciated by President Trump, and it came into effect sometime in October last year, it had two phases as far as the Gaza was concerned. First phase was the ceasefire or cessation of hostility, and the yellow line was drawn, or the yellow line was laid out, and this second phase was that the humanitarian aid should flow in. Now the point is that in the first phase itself, after the ceasefire, there have been almost 400 fatal casualties which have been caused due to the Israelis, consistent bombing, aerial bombing. And second point is the humanitarian aid. See, this Rafah crossing is on the between the border of Gaza and Egypt. Well, when Israeli forces, they took stock, or they actually captured the Rafah crossing, then the Egyptian also closed the crossing, because Egyptian contention is that Rafah crossing should be manned by the Palestinians and not by the Israelis. So that's why this is very important, because that's the main crossing through which the humanitarian aid flows in. And now President Trump's representative, that is Witkoff, and his own son-in-law Jared Kushner, they are in talks with Prime Minister Netanyahu that now this peace plan must move forward. And it can move forward only once the humanitarian aid begins to flow, and the Gaza situation is actually taken forward. Because right now there is only a ceasefire, but the point is that Gaza administration is a major point. Because please remember that 40% of Gaza is still under Hamas. And Hamas, as per the agreement, should lay down the arm, which is not going to happen. So therefore, this agreement is at critical point, and only once this actually gets consolidated, then only that Board of Peace, those issues will come into play, or the Board of Peace will begin to function. Until the first two phases are actually stabilized on the ground, the Board of Peace can only then function. So therefore, it's very important now that Rafah crossing is opened, humanitarian aid begins to flow, and the Egyptians are only going to open Rafah crossing in case it is manned by the Palestinians and not by Israelis. So it's a very critical issue, and that's why the talks are going on, so that the President Trump's 20-point peace plan moves forward and doesn't get stalled. Asuma.
With that, I would like to thank Major General Gigi Dwivedi for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to U.S. More than 670,000 customers in the U.S. as far west as New Mexico were without electricity, and almost 10,000 flights were canceled ahead of a monster winter storm that threatened to paralyze eastern states with heavy snowfall. Forecasters have said that snow, sleet, freezing rain, and dangerously frigid temperatures would sweep the eastern two-thirds of the nation into the week. Calling the storms historic, President Donald Trump has approved federal emergency disaster declarations in South Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, Maryland, and West Virginia, among other states. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.